The country's public health establishment has tortured your children for 8 months for no apparent reason. That happened. That story has not received a lot of coverage, but it's been confirmed tonight. The authorities have admitted it. 60 million American children languishing in their rooms since spring, sitting in front of screens, learning nothing, isolated from human contact, in many cases driven to mental illness. We can now report there was no reason for any of that. The experts were wrong. They had no idea what they were doing. But the most amazing part, and this really is the headline of the story, is that they knew they were wrong when they did it, but they kept lying about it even as American children began to kill themselves.
After Dr. Anthony Fauci, who earlier in the pandemic urged schools to remain closed, changed his position on the situation, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul is now calling on Fauci to apologize to every single parent and school-age child in America.
Well, I think this illustrates the danger of centralizing power and decision-making in one person or in Washington, because when one person is so wrong, as Dr. Fauci has been, it has grave effects for millions of school children. The evidence has been clear for 6 months, evidence from entire countries in Europe and in Asia that schools do not lead to a surge, that kids are poor transmitters of this. Countrywide studies were showing this 6 months ago, and he wouldn't listen. And I tried to convince him of this, and now he sort of flippantly says, oh, we're going to let kids go to school, we're just going to close the bars. Well, we should also look at the evidence on that. Do lockdowns, prevent the spread of this? Right now we have more mandates and more lockdowns than we've ever had, and yet the incidence of COVID is rising exponentially. It may argue that none of the things we are doing are working, and we at least ought to be honest and assess it from an honest perspective, not a biased one.
Now he's decided to say something about it 8 months late. Here's Anthony Fauci on Sunday.
Close the bars and keep the schools open is what we really say. Obviously, you don't have one size fits all, but as I said in the past, and as you accurately quoted me, the default position should be to try as best as possible within reason to keep the children in school or to get them back to school. If you look at the data, the spread among children and from children is not really very big at all, not like one would have suspected.
Over the summer, when the data looked the same as they do tonight, Fauci explained that he couldn't really say if kids should be allowed to go to school. It was, quote, complicated. Except it wasn't complicated. It wasn't complicated then. It's not complicated now. In April, many months ago, a study by the Journal of the American Medical Association found that school-aged children who get the coronavirus, quote, develop only mild symptoms and typically recover within 2 weeks. Months later, same story. In June, a study in The Lancet affirmed this, quote, COVID-19 is generally a mild disease in children, including in infants. Other studies found the exact same thing. No study has found anything but that. There was never much question about it. We shut the schools anyway, crushing millions of kids, affecting their futures in ways we can't even understand at this point. But it's clear it's bad, really bad in some cases. So the question is, why did we do this? And the answer is to save the teachers. The teachers' unions pushed this, and their servants in the Democratic Party obeyed. They're the single largest donors to the Democratic Party, so of course they did. So unionized teachers get to stay home collecting checks for their 9-month-a-year jobs. These classrooms are just too dangerous. But what do the data say about this? Well, for teachers under the age of 50, and that's the vast majority of them, the odds of surviving a coronavirus infection are roughly 99.98%. But we should tell you that for teachers under 70, the risk of dying escalates to a terrifying 99.5% chance of survival. And by the way, if teachers do get sick, it likely won't be from teaching. Children appear not to spread the coronavirus, certainly not effectively. We've known this for a long time. Back in May, researchers in Europe found, quote, children do not appear to be drivers of transmission. And we argue that reopening schools should be considered safe.
All of this body of evidence about schools around the world shows there's no surge. All of the evidence shows that it's rare. But I hear nothing of that coming from you. All I hear, Dr. Fauci, is we can't do this, we can't do that. But he wasn't really listening, and I think the reason is that with Dr. Fauci, I think his belief that we should submit, that we're all members of the hive, we're all members of the collective, that submission is more important than the facts. It's the same people who predicted millions and millions of people would die from this. They've been wrong at every turn. Their models only work when they continue to adjust them with reality, but they never have been accurate from the very beginning. For example, in the spring, he said masks don't matter and don't work. New England Journal of Medicine also said in an editorial that they're basically a talisman, that they don't work outside the hospital setting. But then they changed their course over time, but they're not really looking at data. We have mask mandates in dozens and dozens of states and countries, and without fail, every time we've instituted a mandate, the actual incidence of the disease has risen. So there's no evidence that these mandates are working, and we're crippling the economy. So maybe we ought to reassess what we're doing.
I think we should.
And yet they kept lying about it, all of them. In July, here's just one example. A panel of physicians and experts on infectious disease went on television to explain that going to school isn't dangerous for anyone. They would send their own kids. Watch the news anchor's reaction.
Would you let your kids go back to school?
I will. My kids are looking forward to it.
Yes. Period. Absolutely.
Absolutely. As much as I can.
Without a hesitation.
Without a hesitation, yes.
I have no concerns about sending my child to school in the fall.
I would let my kids go back to school.
Dr. John Torres, NBC News.
They all said yes.
They all said yes, said the newsreader, feigning shock. Can you believe that? Doctors have concluded their own children should go to school. They must be crazy. They're crazy. What do the doctors know about coronavirus? What was this about? And of course, you know the answer. It was about Donald Trump. Donald Trump, in this case, agreed with the doctors. Therefore, the doctors had to be mocked and ignored. Here's what the president said about schools in July.
We have to open our schools. Open our schools. Stop this nonsense. We open our schools.
Stop this nonsense. We reopen our schools. Now, in point of fact, as a scientific matter, that turned out to be sound policy based on sound data. But the media told us the exact opposite of that. One headline at CNN warned of, quote, the very clear dangers of Donald Trump's push to reopen schools. Google didn't censor that as misinformation. It should have. Another headline called out, quote, Donald Trump's mind-bending logic on school reopenings. Mind-bending logic. Those damn data again. Joe Biden's campaign didn't want to hear it. They didn't want you to hear it either. School was dangerous. Period. Donald Trump claimed the opposite. Therefore, it was too dangerous to send your kids or for you to decide to send them. Watch.
Ignoring how the virus spreads, risking teachers and parents' lives, going against the advice of experts.
It's had very little impact on young people.
Do you trust him to do what's best for our children? Because this is not a test.
Yeah, going against the advice of experts. In this country, that's no longer allowed, even and maybe especially when the experts are completely wrong. What's the message? The message couldn't be clearer. They're not your kids anymore. If they were your kids, you could make the key decisions about their lives, but they're not. Those kids, your former kids, belong to Tony Fauci now. Tony Fauci, America's parent. He'll make the decisions about your kids, thank you very much, in conjunction with the nation's Ubermom, who, by the way, is also 80 years old, Mrs. Nancy D. Pelosi. Watch Mrs. Pelosi fret about the health of our children.
Are you confident that students and teachers will go back safely to school in the fall?
No, I think what we heard from the secretary was malfeasance and dereliction of duty. This is appalling. They're messing. They're messing. The president and his administration are messing with the health of our children. Going back to school presents the biggest risk for the spread of the coronavirus.
If that's not criminal, what she just said, we may need to redefine what it means to commit a crime. 60 million school-aged children affected by a decision that was wrong, and many of them hurt for life. But we just blow right past it and allow political leaders like that to blow right past it with phrases like the health of our children. What happens when you lock children in their rooms in front of screens and prevent them from experiencing human contact? Has Nancy Pelosi ever been asked that question? Has she ever wondered about the answer? According to the Centers for Disease Control, a total of 522 children between the ages of 5 and 14 died of suicide in 2017. In that same age group, only 42 children have died from the coronavirus so far this year. What are those suicide numbers going to look like if we continue to take Nancy Pelosi's advice about the health of our children? We already have some indications of that. Future years will reveal the whole picture, and you can be certain it'll be horrifying.
The point about the schools is really critical because this is the most irrational public policy probably in modern history. Children have virtually zero risk of getting a serious complication, virtually zero risk of dying. You don't lock down the children because you are personally afraid. It's totally outrageous.
Dr. Scott Atlas was attacked as a monster for saying that, really attacked. Dr. Tony Fauci, by contrast, was deified. Signs throughout Northwest D.C. said, "I believe Dr. Fauci." But the truth is that Scott Atlas was right, and Dr. Fauci was revealed as a power-mad incompetent. That's not our opinion, by the way. The data prove it.